Hey, what's up guys? So today what I want to do is talk a little bit about my PIDS, my rates, and how I have stuff set up on my KISS configurator. And really walk through a few things to consider if you're interested in finding your rates or finding your PIDS or just trying to get your aircraft feel a little bit better in the air. And there's a few things to consider that I think a lot of people don't talk about, so I'm going to talk through those things in this particular video. Hopefully give you guys a good insight to how I have my stuff set up, and you could probably use, if you're using the same type of gear I am, or very close to this, and you're on 4S, this will give you a good baseline to use for your particular craft. So another thing to kind of mention is that I know a lot of people have been flying 6S, and I'm one of the individuals that have kind of held back from the 6S jump. This is a 4S quad, so when you make the jump from 4S to 6S, it's going to be different. The voltage increase is going to be significant. That's going to impact the PIDs on any aircraft if you keep them the same from a 4S setup to a 6S setup. So just be wary of that. Just be aware of that for anyone that's flying 6S that tries to use this particular tune. This is a 4S quad, and I'll list all the components of all this gear in the description below just to help you guys understand what components I'm flying in this particular craft. So enough said of that. We're going to jump right into the configurator, and I'll show you a few things that I have configured for my PIDs, my rates, and all these other configurations. Talk about PIDs and talk a little bit about my rates. Everything else is pretty much general settings. So yeah, if you have a question about any of the general stuff outside of those two areas, just let me know in the comments and I'll try to answer them the best I can. So first thing we want to talk about is P term across roll, pitch, and yaw. So P term is really how responsive your quad is going to be when you perform a movement. And my kind of observation has been that I should not go over 5 for roll, 7 for pitch, and 7 for yaw. And that's the reason why I have it very moderate, very moderately configured in that aspect, because what I found is that if you start exceeding those thresholds, then you're going to introduce micro oscillations in your craft. The way that I think about things is that I want my quad to operate the same across different environmental thresholds. So if it's really cold outside, it's going to be very similar to me. It's going to operate as I would expect. And if it's very hot, it's going to do the same. So I don't really have to mess around with my PIDs as much. I don't touch them that often. I touch them if I'm changing a component like a motor, or I'm trying a new ESC, things of that nature. But all in all, my PIDs really don't change, especially if I'm using the same craft across different environmental thresholds like warm weather, cold weather, snowing, raining, whatever the case may be. So let's move on to the I term. I term is it's pretty much the same way. I think that I term in particular with KISS and what I have myself set up is that once you go above 0.06, you're going to start introducing a lot more stiffness into your craft, and it just depends on personal preference. I don't like it that stiff in terms of the feel of my craft, but there are people out there that like it like that. They like the feel of the craft. So I have a very moderate on I term. D term, same thing, super moderate, but I will say is that you want it in the 14 to 17 range for your roll and pitch axis, your D term, because once you get above 17 or 18-ish, it's gonna feel a little bit stiff. It's not gonna be as fluid movements, and it's not gonna be as snappy, which that's kind of what I go for, is more of a snappy feel. One thing I will say is that PIDs are probably going to be the toughest thing to learn as a beginner. It's just so difficult. But if you kind of eliminate the others, for instance, if you want to focus on roll and you work on roll until you get roll as comfortable as you can, and then you move on to pitch, and then you move on to yaw. Yaw should be the last one you configure. Pitch and roll are going to be the more significant ones when you're tuning, and the ones that are going to require the most attention, especially your pitch axis, because that weight is shifting every time you do a flip, because you're carrying around a camera on top of the front side of it, and the battery could be in the back side of it, and it's just going to vary from craft to craft how much the pitch axis needs to be tuned. So those are my PIDs. I'm going to move on to my rates and kind of talk a little bit about that. But before I go to the rate screen, I'm going to scroll through each tab to make sure that you guys kind of understand what I have configured in those other tabs, and if something's applicable for you to know. Let me just move on to the next screen. Okay. This is pretty much standard stuff here, but the one thing I do want to point out is set point weight in D term. And the way that I view this number is essentially the higher up you go, the more responsive you're going to be, right? And that's 100. I currently have that set at 80. And the more downstream you're going to go, 0, right? It's going to feel a lot more loose. It's going to feel a lot more smooth, and it's going to be to a point where it's going to be a little bit sloppy. And so I like to have it around 80-ish, where I do get that locked in feel, but it takes away some of these micro movements that I have and I'm kind of unintentionally doing on my controller. So that's the reason I have set it 80. Again, personal preference, but it is something to kind of note that if you're experiencing some twitching, like a little bit of micro twitching from your controller, from an input perspective, try to play around that set point weight in D term, because the lower you go, the smoother it's going to be, and it just depends on personal preference on how much is that number to you. So mine is set at 80, and that's kind of what I like. Rates, I know some people have talked about rates in the past, and it's a hot topic, and it's always going to be a hot topic, because if there's one thing that could affect your flight performance the most outside of PIDS, it's going to be rates. And what I would say is that I would keep your PIDS default and focus on your rates if you want to hurry up and get to a place where it's most impactful. I have my RC rate at 1.7 for pitch and roll. I like to keep those two axes very similar. My roll and my pitch are always going to be the same, just because I like the predictability of it. My yaw is going to be completely different, because yaw I don't really use that much, and on top of that I do fly thumbs, so I don't want it as sensitive as my pitch and roll axis would be, because it's just gonna get in the way of movements. So I have my rates at 0.68 for both roll and pitch. For RC curve, 0.3 for roll and pitch. Again, RC curve is basically a sponge in the middle. So essentially, when you move and you're deflecting your stick movements, right, RC curve is going to make that inside a little bit more loose. So if you turn a little bit, it's going to give you that cushion. Rates in particular are going to be the most personal thing that you could do for yourself, because you taking my rates may work or may not, but spend the time, try to find a baseline to work from, and that's kind of how I configured my rates, and spent a lot of time on configuring these rates. And I still make tweaks here or there, and that's the reason why I wanted to show you, but I do still make tweaks here or there, just because it depends on, not only does it depend on your tune, right, your PIDS, because it's all one system, it also depends on the gear you're running. For instance, if you have the same quad with two different propellers, one's a higher pitch, one's a lower pitch prop, let's take the S5 and S3. Well, the S3 is going to be like you increased your rates when you compare it to the S5, because it's a lot more rigid and it's a lot more heavy in the air, the S5 is, and it's just going to feel completely different. So these numbers and all the numbers I talk to you here about are going to be basically a baseline for you to work from, because your hardware is really a big determinant in what PID values, what rates you need to have set up for that particular feel you're going for. So I just want to quickly talk about that. I know a lot of people talk about this, you know, these max spin second things, but I'm at 1063 for anyone that cares. 750, where the case may be. But so this is a good screen to kind of be aware of. This is how I have my stuff set up. Again, personal preference. It depends on your flying style, depends on what you're trying to go for, but this is kind of my rates. This is a good baseline for you to start at. Moving on. TPA, this is default. I don't mess with TPA in most cases unless I'm experiencing some weird, really weird issues. But right now, the stuff I run, it's super solid. I have not had issues to kind of use TPA. If you have any particular questions about anything that I went through, leave them in the comments below. And if you like this video, let me know in the comments as well. Give me a like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And see you guys in the next video. See ya.
I've been caught up in this life, don't speak my mind enough. I'm trying to keep pushing on me, boundaries.